Well, it looks like this healthcare thing just fell apart now, didn't it?
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
All right, Powerhouse Roundtable here. Joe Cammarano from Providence College and Michael Kennedy from Brown University. Both familiar if you're a regular viewer. If you're not, welcome. These guys have great minds, and I just will ask a few questions and listen. How are you? Great to have you in. You want an update? I think I lost a pound. All right, there we go. Now, I don't know what I was thinking yesterday, but not as bad. You have a big vacation, Joe, and again, you find out that all of a sudden you gain 6 pounds on vacation, and you think, geez, you know what? You never watch this show for how I look anyway, right? This is, am I good, right? Right, Kev? This. All right, let's get on with this thing. I don't know. It's the middle of summer. It's okay to be punchy. Headlines. Washington. Oh, boy. You know, when it caves pretty quickly, you know, and this one, too. Let me tell you something. He'll suggest anything at this point, seems to me. Here's the latest from CBS at press time.
Conservative Senators Mike Lee of Utah and Jerry Moran of Kansas delivered the fatal blow last night on the GOP plan to repeal and replace Obamacare. They issued statements saying we should not put our stamp of approval on bad policy. And Lee added the plan doesn't go far enough in lowering premiums for middle-class families.
This doesn't have to be the end of the story.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell announced a plan to vote on an old piece of legislation that completely repeals Obamacare, but only after a 2-year transition period to give Republicans time to find a replacement.
Passing the repeal legislation will allow us to accomplish what we need to do on behalf of our people.
It's a plan that McConnell himself criticized less than 2 weeks ago.
I think repealing and then delaying the replacement doesn't work.
Critics are skeptical Republicans can find consensus in the next 2 years if they weren't able to do it in the last 7 months. Republican Senator Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia and Maine Susan Collins have already announced they will oppose the repeal-only plan.
I believe it would cause the insurance markets to go into turmoil, and I don't think it is the right way to proceed.
The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office estimates the bill would kick 18 million people off insurance rolls in the first year, growing to 32 million by 2026.
Huh. Joe Cammarano is a political scientist at Providence College, and Michael Kennedy is a political sociologist. What's the difference?
We pay more attention to the social.
Yeah, I would agree. We focus a little more on the individual, and I'd say you focus more on the consequences for the social.
Well, I know there's politics, 2 smart guys. So that's all. That's good enough for me. Wow, this whole thing is, you know, on a clinical level, Mr. Political Scientist. This thing was kind of doomed from the get. A lot of sand kicking up, but no traction ever. Really?
Well, the first thing is put it into context with first-term president. This is a normal thing. In the summer, things start going a little bad. If you look back at 2001, George W. Bush was not looking great. Obama was raising all the controversy with the legislation he was passing. So there's a normal cycle, first of all. So this is a common thing after the honeymoon period, which we never really had with Trump. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, this is also the consequence of a president who doesn't know what he's doing. That Mitch McConnell is trying to do the job of the president, and that is rallying the party, rallying the American people around a coherent piece of legislation, which we've expected from presidents since at least FDR.
Yeah, the very idea that in the last few days, we'll talk about today's tweets in a moment, but the last few days he's been saying, Mitch has got to pull this together, Mitch has got to pull this together, as if he's completely discharged his entire leadership role in this whole thing. Yes?
Right. So I so appreciate being on here with Joe because he can handle the institutional exactitudes. But what I would say about this right now
is... That's a big word, by the way.
I use
love
that. But what I think Trump has done, he has abdicated his role as president. And he owns it. Despite what he says now, he owns this failure because he did not step up. And the second thing I would say about this, and this is the social point, his legitimacy depends upon delivering health care for those left behind, for those whose premiums are too expensive. And he has just failed miserably because he does not know how to play the art of the deal in Washington. He's only playing the art of the fool.
Well, that wraps it up for this evening's broadcast. I mean, no, it's a punctuating commentary. What's fascinating about this whole thing is that you suggest that he's left the high-paying premium payers behind. Those aren't really, I mean, in part, those are the ones that he was speaking to and brought through in the election, but it was those who couldn't afford health care still, allegedly, out there in the Midwest, who felt like I guess it got too expensive, but there's a whole, let me see if I can get this point. All of the details of these two plans, the House plan and the Senate plan, seem to leave behind the very people that thought they were coming with him in the election. That's the point I was trying to make.
Yeah,
Thank you.
That's right. I think that's quite accurate, and I think this is the dilemma of governing. And this is why, for 2 years now, I've been saying this is not someone who should be president, because he doesn't understand the fundamental complexity of the office and his role in it.
But the very idea, Mike, that you say that he's, the both of you agree that he's abdicated his responsibility as president. Do you think he knows that?
No. He would have to be able
Do you
to
think his
place
supporters
himself outside his
understand
own
that?
identity and his own interests. No. He doesn't have the personal capacity to understand that what he's doing is self-destructive.
So people try to interpret Trump. What is this political actor? And a lot of people identified him as a populist. And as a populist, he should be thinking about policies that benefit the people left behind. And clearly, he is not doing that. And what he is instead, rather than being a populist, he's a kind of megalomaniac who's thinking only about himself, and when he gets generous, thinks about his family. And this, of course, ties in to the ways in which his own son and son-in-law are creating a legitimation crisis even deeper.
And we'll get to that in our next segment. So, what happens now? Because the president was tweeting out today, hey, you know what? We got to go from 60 to a simple majority. Now there's a notion of repeal. So, to clear up the science of this, passage of this bill required 51 votes.
Yeah, the bill that was pulled it required 51 votes because it was going to be through what's called the reconciliation process. And that is not changing the letter of any law. We're just going to shift funding so that we reallocate our priorities in such a way it changes policy. You can do that through reconciliation. It's not a permanent change, but it's a long-term change. If you want to actually repeal the law, you have to pass legislation changing the language of the law. That still requires a 60-vote filibuster-proof majority.
And it cannot be done through reconciliation.
It cannot be done through reconciliation.
So he's arguing that he'd like to have it done through 51 votes. I'm not sure he gets the concept of reconciliation.
Yeah, he does, but of course he plays checkers, not chess. Mitch McConnell plays chess. Mitch McConnell knows that the Republicans have a shot at losing majority, and they don't want 51 votes on the Democratic side to be enough.
So any repeal option here is DOA?
It's essentially DOA, yes.
And that means what for this part of the segment of the show and his presidency?
Well, anybody
who
has stock in health insurance companies might want to think about selling now. I shouldn't say that on air. Because the whole health insurance industry has been propped up in a lot of ways to be guaranteed profit through Obamacare. And if they're going to let that wither and die, and they're going to sort of let it go into neglect, health insurance companies are going to take a big hit.
Well, if
Obamacare have to insure everybody, and they're going to insure people who cost them a lot of money, and they're not going to enforce the mandate, and so all the people who are healthy aren't going to join the policies, which means the revenue streams go down.
Well, wait a second. If they're not repealing, the mandate's in place.
If the mandate's in place but not enforced, because even Obama was able to delay that, if it's not enforced, then nobody's going to get health insurance, and so there'll be fewer people in the pool.
Meaning it's not being. Maybe I missed something. It's not being enforced through the tax code. The
There
tax
has
code is...
not been a year, I believe, I don't think this year even, there's not been a year where people have actually been penalized or taxed, as the Supreme Court has called.
Even though the forms are there for you to fill out and the data is there to enter, you're telling me there's no enforcement of this?
There has not been any enforcement. Nobody's been assessed a penalty, as far as I know. This year may have been the first year, but I don't think so.
All right. So when we come back,
Not an expert.
I want to pick up on Michael's thought there, because the family isn't helping any better. But I do want to check in and let you know about the folks at Navigant Credit Union, one of our fine sponsors. Listen, this card valet program is awesome. It ends up on your smartphone. Everything that is banking is on your smartphone. I mean, you've done online banking, I know that. But when you're running around and you want to just check your balance, or you want to make a payment, or you want anything you want to do banking-wise, it's right there with the Card Valet app at Navigant Credit Union. Online at navigantcu.org. Check them out. An equal opportunity lender, NCOA, protected, all that. Navigants. We're back.
At first, there was indication that it was just 4 people. It was actually many more people. We don't know what transpired in that meeting until we get a chance to talk to all of the individuals who participated.
Senator Warner, I think, has been pretty fair-minded when it comes to the Russian investigation. Of course, he's a Democrat, and he's got his own, I don't know if he's got his own goals, but I think he's been one of the more even-handed guys in this whole conversation. Mike, you're talking about this in I've never seen anything so nepotistic. Is that a word?
Yes.
Is that a word? The yes. Nepotism here is so in our faces here in America, and you know, there's 30–40% of America that discounts it as if it doesn't really matter. But Donald Trump's going to get crucified by it. He'll be crushed by it in and of itself, don't you think? With the headlines, Kev, just throw them up as we speak. Just the whole Russian meeting, Junior. First it was a couple, now it's 4, 5, 6. Now we're up to 8. Tell me about what you're thinking about this whole thing.
So on the way over, in addition to wondering how you would be dressed, I wanted to think about
that's never
what would be
a very fascinating thing.
What would be a quick way to summarize what has happened since I was last on the show?
Yes.
And I would say that Trump has a perfect, barely passing C record, because he's doing really well in collusion, doing really well in cover-up, and doing really well in being the object of compromise or compromise. And unfortunately, he is not the worst. His son is now the worst performer on the team, because he doesn't even know how to lay out tweets that would exonerate himself.
You know, this whole Russia thing, again, goes back to this idea of politics not being really a good sport for amateurs. And Trump, but also his family, and most of the people associated with him, just, you know, they're amateurs, and this is coming back to bite them. I also think that, yeah, Donald Trump Jr. is probably a chip off the old chip, and he's not particularly sophisticated because he thinks he's exonerated because he didn't find the dirt he was looking for. But let's wait and see what Mueller comes up with. I'm the type of guy that says, look, maybe this was just stupidity. Maybe it was ignorance or incompetence. Maybe it was nefarious. Let the investigator who knows what he's doing do his job.
Well, listen, I mean, there are people who, and I'm not suggesting that I know enough to say there's a crime here, but people commit crimes accidentally.
Sure.
Yeah, so the idea that he gets this reach, and it's about campaign, you know, it's about information regarding the Clinton campaign, and it's opposition intel, and he knee-jerk reacts, love to take the meeting. Naivete.
That doesn't pass the smell test, by the way.
Why?
Because, number one, Paul Manafort is not a rookie. And I know of nobody, and I probably have 20, 25 former students and another 20, 25 associates and friends who do this kind of work. None of them would have gone to that meeting. None of them, without calling the FBI.
Well, Trump Jr. could go to the meeting without.
Manafort knew that.
But Manafort went with him to the meeting.
Manafort should have intervened if this was all innocent and said, let's check, let's clear this.
Right.
He didn't
But
do
this
that.
notion that they should have, took a left turn and gone to the FBI, real time with amateurs.
So
That's why I
what's
said let Mueller do his job.
Right.
We need to let Mueller do his job, but we also can't let Trump off the hook right now. He's using his familiar strategies of dissembling and redirecting our attention. I think the only way to, honestly, I'm feeling like we need to protect the security of America. And we need to do that by getting to the bottom of this as soon as possible. Why? Because these charges of collusion and cover-up are only the tip of the iceberg. Because if Putin et al. Have something on Trump that allows them to compromise him, then we are in deep trouble. After all, what's in the news today? Whether we're going to be giving the mansions back to the Russians that Obama took away. Now, Trump is caught. He's caught because if he gives them back, that's evidence of compromise. If he doesn't give them back, then he's not being his own man. So we can't trust what he's doing until we know what are the relationships that go beyond this meeting and that, let me finish with this point, that enable that meeting to happen so easily. Because obviously this was not just a cold call. This was not just this, this crazy guy that was setting up the meeting. This is embedded in a series of other financial relationships that we don't know about because we don't have Trump's taxes.
For the conservative or Trump supporter types, and I'm not sure that it's one and the same, right, in media, who would suggest that media in general, this show is promoting a self-determined argument that no matter what comes up factually, we're going to fit it into our dynamic, which is this guy's got to go. That everything fits into that, and that media is driving an agenda, and I'm part of it, and you two are part of it, because you're guesting on this program. That everything has got to be at a very high drama level. That this thing has got to be, there are still a couple people throwing banana peels at the screen right now over this conversation.
Absolutely.
And your reaction to that is?
Well, my first reaction is, I understand that perspective, but I want you to look in the mirror. I want these people to look themselves in the mirror and wonder if they're doing this exactly what it is that they're accusing us of. Because I've noticed that Trump tends to make accusations based upon what he's doing or how he behaves. And I just want people to be honest. I care about this country deeply. And I, like you, I think we could allow this country to be destroyed by this presidency. And I'm serious about that. And I ask the question every day, am I being fair? And I work very hard to be as fair as I can while being honest. Facts have to lead where facts go.
You're making an important point, too, which is that we can't get caught up in the entertainment drama of this, because it is entertainment television from the get-go, this entire candidacy and this election and everything else, that, boy, the security of the country is definitely at stake. Maybe not necessarily that meeting being instrumental, but the cumulative deterioration of the leadership role here does put the country in a compromising position.
Yes. So I could provide a narrative that those throwing the banana peels would like.
Good. When we come back, the narrative. Get your banana peels ready. Go easy on your TVs. They're expensive. Be right back.
Well, look, I'm not going to get into the specifics of this, but I will say that that is quite often for people who are given information during the heat of a campaign to ask what that is. That's what simply he did. The president's made it clear through his tweet, and there was nothing, that, as far as we know, that would lead anyone to believe that that there was anything except for a discussion about adoption of the Maginski Act. But I would refer you back to counsel on that one.
Oh my goodness! I don't know how Sean Spicer does it. That is, the discussion of the Trump Jr. meeting with Manafort and gosh knows how many others with these Russian folks. To those with their banana peels ready, who are holding on to this concept that media is just drumming up this mega drama on their elected president, You say?
You say that they are, well, if I want to help their story, I would say it's not just the media who are out to get Trump. It's also the deep state. And the deep state is the really dangerous part. No one's quoting me on that because I don't believe it, but I'm saying that this narrative is out there. And what represents the deep state best? The intelligence community. And if the intelligence community is out to get Trump, then all of these stories, all of this evidence of collusion, cover-up, and compromise is not reliable data. And so here we have the crisis of democracy. Because if we cannot trust the professionals of our government, if we cannot trust the information and data they share, there is no basis on which we can have democratic deliberation, and all we have are friends and enemies. And that is not what makes a democracy. That is what makes for war.
All right, but so you're setting that up as a devil's argument. You don't believe the intel community is acting in that
No.
manner.
The intel community,
So
I can disagree with them.
Why did you raise that and scare me?
I raised that to scare you in order to connect with those in your audience who believe that. And here's the next point. If you believe that there is a deep state in America, tell me how you would recognize that the deep state is no longer operating. There's no way to falsify your hypothesis, and that's the trouble we're in.
Well, I think we just need to keep our
Do you believe there's
feet
a
on the
deep
ground.
state of intel looking to get this guy?
No, I think actually, if anything, this deep state is going to save democracy in this country.
And you believe that too?
Yes.
Yeah.
You have a funny way of explaining it today. You're so good and theatric. I understand what you were just doing there. But there are folks who are of this, tunnel vision, who thank you very much. You just reloaded their cache.
I reloaded their cache because I trust people to do more than repeat the ridiculous. And the idea that the American state is run by a deep state is ridiculous.
You agree?
Yeah, I do agree. If that were true, how could Barack Obama have gotten through 2 terms as president?
Okay, I told you that we had a powerful discussion coming up here. Is there a summary ever? You know what I mean? Do you know what I'm asking you? Is there a summary ever?
I don't think in the Trump era there's ever going to be an end point or even a pause point. Everything is going to be constant.
Until?
Until he's no longer president.
And you think that will happen prematurely?
No, I don't. Actually, I think there are good things to what Trump is doing. Trump is trying to do some of the things he said he would do on the campaign, which means he is trying to be accountable to the people he sees as electing him.
Well, he's all for health care. The wall doesn't get mentioned much. A fence every once in a while.
Well, he's a salesman.
Final thought.
We keep on careening toward crisis. The only way in which we're going to get out of crisis is when a substantial part of the Republican Party stands up and says, we need to govern responsibly, and that means collaboratively with the Democrats.
And you see an end to this Trump discussion. I mean, you see.
I think Trump will leave office before, and it will be because Republicans stand up and say he's not only damaging our republic, but he's damaging our party.
I don't see it because I don't think his personality can handle that.
All right. Big show tomorrow. I'll tell you what it is next. Thanks, guys. Big meeting this afternoon reportedly between the Speaker of the House and the Senate President. The Speaker will be here to tell us about it tomorrow. See you on the radio at 3 on WPRO. Good night.